Not a single moment was Plan Colombia discussed directly by the Colombian Congress. Major decisions were made by the executive branch and by the U.S. State Department. That was the style of the negotiation.
To give a sense of the priorities in the Congress, one of the biggest debates when Plan Colombia was debated on the floor was how many helicopters should be built in Texas at Bell Helicopter Textron, how many would be built in Connecticut at Sikorsky Helicopter. So rather than debating, is a military solution to the drug war possible, what will be the impacts on the people of Colombia, they were arguing over the money. Is the company in my state going to get it? Is the company in Texas going to get it? So it was sort of one of the less dignified moments in the American foreign policy debates.
Not a single European country and not a Latin American country has openly and wholeheartedly supported our approach in Colombia. They see it as too militarized, and they see it as a failure as far as drug policy goes. That is an indication that there must be something wrong with the overall approach.
It's not so much an aid program as another way to subsidize the military-industrial complex in the United States.
In this case, much of the money is going to end up with helicopter companies. Sikorsky, which makes the Black Hawk helicopter, will be getting almost $250 million, and Bell Helicopter, which makes the upgrades for the Huey, is going to get somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 million.
Besides channeling billions of U.S. taxpayers' dollars into U.S. arms-making corporations, the State Department has resorted to sending private mercenaries instead of regular American military personnel to carry out missions in Colombia.
There are not U.S. military personnel engaged in any kind of military operations in the country. The contractor situation is an interesting one, and in many ways, it's not particularly a military issue.
When you use private military contractors, you don't have the same kinds of oversight, the same kind of accountability that you have when you use GIs.
The reason we are outsourcing this war, privatizing this war, is because we don't have the kind of public support in this country to put U.S. military service personnel in the line of fire. And so we're resorting to the private sector to carry out these functions.
So this is a under-the-radar kind of war, a little secret war that the United States is using its taxpayer dollars to engage in.
A lot of Americans don't realize what a substantial military effort the United States is making in Colombia, but actually Colombia is the third largest recipient of U.S. military aid after Egypt and Israel.
There's always been a concern in providing assistance to Colombia because they've been in effect a civil war for 30 years.
Much older than the current drug war situation, Colombia's civil strife is as old as the country itself. Originating in colonial racism and oligarchy, the social conflict develops as Colombia evolves into an industrial society, divided between a tiny rich elite and a poor working majority. While the haves and have-nots blame each other for initiating violence, it is the assassination in 1948 of a charismatic populist leader, Jorge Eliezer Gaitan, that leads to a social explosion that Colombians themselves refer to as La Violencia. With the backing of a conservative government, anti-leftist landowners and industrialists sent hordes of thugs against rioting students, workers, and peasants, forcing them to the countryside where they formed the first guerrilla movements. As the world seems on the verge of a global confrontation between capitalism and socialism, Washington makes it a priority to back a pro-Western Colombian establishment and train its military and so-called paramilitary groups to try to wipe out the now entrenched leftist guerrillas. Despite millions of dollars spent and the training of over 10,000 Colombian officers in counter-guerrilla tactics, the Colombian military never manages to prevail. In the early 80s, the war actually gets worse as narco-traffickers become players in this conflict with more money and sophisticated weapons. From now on, even though officially aimed against drugs, Washington's enormous infusion of arms and equipment to the Colombian military has been catalyzing a renewed assault against the leftist rebels.
The only impact that Plan Colombia has on the guerrilla is that there are more U.S. military advisors, more warplanes, more helicopters, more war. And every time they increase the war against the guerrilla answers with more war to defend itself.
Igualmente con más guerra para poderse defender.
If you call them narco-guerrillas, you can then turn on people that are prosecuting a civil war and consider them to be drug runners, and then you can use the same helicopters and weapons and pilots against the people in the Civil War saying, well, they're drug runners.
Unen dos variables como si fueran una sola. They combine these two factors as if it was only one, the guerrilla and narco-trafficking. This is wrong because the guerrilla, for instance, in the Putumayo, was there long before the cultivation of coca.
What we do only is that we raise a tax on people who buy from the farmers. We do the same thing with the import and export of many other commercial products in Colombia.
La guerrilla tiene un proyecto.
The guerrilla had a political agenda that originally fitted the classic Marxist pattern of classless society, what is known as the proletariat dictatorship. Today, they don't stand for the same thing. Today, they are open to an agenda including economic, political, and social propositions to transform today's society.
De sociedad actual.